Welcome to the Collection of Jhourneys podcast, where we explore the stories of everyday people who have had their lives changed by the blissful and therapeutic states of Jhana Meditation. In this episode, we talk to David Phelan, music producer and songwriter for some top names like Zayn, Sia, and Blackpink, who was on a recent Jhourney retreat. He shares how music, psychedelics, and a challenging time led him from identifying as a confident materialist to now a regular meditator. He developed panic attacks and then cured himself by intentionally inducing and observing them in meditation. For the first two-thirds of the interview, I ask him detailed questions about his background, habits, and decisions that led him to where his meditation practice is today. In the final third of the interview, he shares how his recent jhana experience was as personally significant as his wedding day, and how he hopes to use jhanas to make music in the future with less fear. Welcome, David. We've been looking forward to chatting. The context in which you and I met is on the recent Jhourney meditation retreat, where I know that you had a jhana experience. I've been looking forward to having an opportunity to chat with you here on the podcast about what your background was, how you first got into meditation, give our listeners a chance to learn a bit about you, what you do for work, that kind of thing, and then how the jhana experience came about, what it was like, and what it means for you. Thanks for coming on.
Great. Thanks for having me on, and really good to see you again also after a very enjoyable retreat. So I'm David Phelan. I am from Ireland, where I was born. I now live in London, where I've lived for the last 11 years. Music took me to London, and then I think music got me into meditation really eventually too. I thought it was always about concentration. I was like, I won't be able to concentrate like that. So I just didn't. I tried a few times and it just seemed like boring or whatever. I think.
And how old were you when this happened?
Probably like 15, around that age.
Okay.
I remember one day playing the guitar, and I read like Steve Vai is like a famous guitarist, and he said something about meditating on one note. And I did play one note for an hour once, like he said. But I only did it once, and I was like, oh, that was very interesting, and didn't do it again.
Yeah. So I had this almost like an initial Google search that happened at age 15 or so. And then how did an Irish music loving guy like you eventually start sitting?
Eventually, I went to John Hopkins, who's an amazing musician who makes like techno and also like ambient music. I went to his concert for his album called Singularity, and it was in London in the Brixton Academy. And I went with two dear friends of mine and my wife. And we had certain stuff. That was in 2019, I would say, like October.
So about 4-ish years ago or so.
Yes, maybe it was 2018. One of the two. I'm so bad.
Pretty recently. Yeah.
It was actually probably 2018. That's probably what it was. Something like that, but pretty recently.
So this suggests that for a better part of until relatively recently, you've not been spiritual at all.
Yeah, I was very materialist, almost like Clockwork Universe level materialist for a long time. I felt very solid in that and didn't really think. I obviously was always deep thinker. I always thought about things, but it didn't really bring me much. I don't know. I didn't contemplate the self much or things like that. I more preferred contemplating the infinity of the universe and things like that. Mm-hmm. They were more interesting,
like philosophical inquiries or something.
Yes, that sort of thing. Yeah, and then.
Did you study music in university as well?
No, I studied psychology for a year and then I dropped out. I think I was just a little bit early, because I reckon if I'd gone a few years later and the psychedelic renaissance was picking up, I might have stayed with it. But I didn't really respond to Maslow's hierarchy of needs and all those things. They just really, thought, I didn't know later that Eastern religions were so far ahead of that. I discovered that much later, but I did find it a bit like kind of just intellectualizing very simple concepts and stuff like that. So I just eventually just kind of transitioned to music instead.
Yeah, I understand that the road of the music producer is a hard and competitive road, and you dropped out of school and you're still living in London. And so has that been?
Well, actually, I was in Galway in Ireland when I dropped out of school, and I just joined a band and just kept following music because I wanted to. Yeah. And eventually I moved to London. I didn't really think about it. I just really wanted to do it. I remember my parents sent my sister to Galway to go, you really going to drop out?
Yeah.
was like, I'm gonna do it. And apparently my sister went back to my parents and said, he'll do it, he'll manage it in some way. Then eventually, when I went to London, I got a job in a studio here and then just worked my way up. I think if I'd thought about it, I probably wouldn't have done it because the chances are really low. And I think it was at the total doldrum of the music industry too, just when I had the year where I had the lowest earnings that it ever had in general. And
when was that?
So that would have been like, 12 years ago. That would make about sense. Not that long. When I dropped out and started doing music, it would have been just after 2008, which I think would have been definitely the time that it was a bad year for the music industry.
Yeah. So you dropped out in 2008, 2009?
Yeah, around that year.
Okay.
Yeah,
I see. Yeah. But then you mentioned something about 12 years ago, which would have been like 2011. So there's a few years.
Yeah, that's when I moved to London. That's when I started. Like before that, I was just like engineering in studios in Ireland, just trying to figure out, learn stuff myself because I didn't go to college to do the music. So I had to learn how to do programs. So I would just tell the studios that I wanted to work at that I knew how to do stuff. And if I got the job, then I'd go on the internet and learn how to do it.
Okay, here's some of the hustle that I was suspecting was under the hood if you've been in the music industry for so long. So
yes.
You basically taught yourself, you taught yourself how to do sound engineering, taught yourself how to program. I'm like, is this programming like the kind of programming that I'm familiar with as a software engineer, like Python?
No, programming drums and programming music and all that. And definitely taught myself a little, but also taught the internet. Plus also anytime I would know someone's a live sound engineer, I'd try and work with them or I'd do whatever I could to learn from people. And then when I went to London, I worked in different studios and there I would learn from people. And eventually I met a guy in a studio in London, Alex Oriot, who's my songwriting partner. We both worked in a studio. We really got on and we just started making music together like every day and eventually started to get some success. And then, managed to leave the studio world and just write songs all the time as a living. So that's.
And so when you write these songs and then other people perform them.
Yes, exactly. I can sing like folk music okay, but I can't sing like pop songs. So we work with talented songwriters who work with us and we'll suggest melodies and make chords and work like that together. And then those will get released by people, hopefully. Yeah. You don't get paid to get released.
Are there maybe names that me or the audience might recognize?
So we have some. Our biggest song is Dusk Till Dawn with Zayn and Sia.
Oh, those are some names.
Yes. That one we found out the other day is one of the there's only 84 songs with more than 2 billion views on YouTube, and that's one of them. So
wow. I can't wait to watch this after
the video is epic actually, and Sia is amazing. That was a really good music day as well. I remember when we first heard about Sia's vocal when it came back to us. And then just people like that. I'm also bad when I get asked, like big UK acts and some other American acts. Like we did Nicki Minaj, track for her, and some other people like that as well. Yeah.
Oh, cool.
We did Blackpink actually. We had something on their recent album that was #1 in America too.
So. Wow, that's great. So now, after you've come a long way from teaching yourself how to do some of this work and telling other people you can already do it. And now you're in a spot where it's not job security is in question or the hustle is so uncertain. You're in a place where you're hustling, but you've made a name for yourself.
Yes, exactly. And that actually would take us to the meditation thing then as well. So like I was saying, I was going to that concert. John Hopkins.
Yes, I wanted to go back to this. Tell me.
In Brixton with my two good friends and my wife, and we had certain substances and went to the concert. And it was the concept of the album is the universe from the Big Bang, singularity to now, basically, and I guess into the future. But there's no words. It's just techno music doing that. And I had such a beautiful experience at the concert. We all did. And it was just really, I didn't really think about it. I was just like, oh, wow, he is amazing at making music. And I felt like he knew something I didn't as far as like tension and release goes and things like that in music.
Is this the language that you would use now? Or is this language that you would have used in real time? Like leaving this concert, you're like, this guy knows something about tension and release that I don't? Or is this like current David?
It is, but it's funny, actually, you just pointed out that I didn't realize that's what I was referring to. And tension release in music is when you have a chord like that goes like, and it has that, and then you gotta, and one thing feels home, and everybody feels that kind of tension of the first one to the release. So it's not the same, but I know what you're talking about. Tension release and meditation, and that hadn't occurred to me. And that's important for good music and for taking people on a journey, especially in electronic music like techno and things like that, because you don't tend to have the chord progressions be the same. So you need to be more creative in how you provide the tension and release. And he is very good at that. But the next day after the concert, I remember feeling so like loose, and my shoulders were like free of weight, and I put on some everybody was a little worse for wear, but I don't really get that the day after stuff like that. If I don't drink, I'm totally fine. So I was like, oh, I'll go get everybody like I don't know, breakfast. Like I went out to get some pastries or something, and I put on some Bach, and it was like a beautiful day, and I was like, oh, I feel really good. I was like, well, I can't do what I did last night all the time. So I think I'd heard things about John Hopkins meditating and doing stuff like that. So I said, I'll do a bit of that myself and see what happens. And because that experience had been so powerful, I actually just kept it all up. So I started with Wim Hof breathing and cold showers, and then yoga every day, and started exercising. And then in the Wim Hof thing, he just did a 2-minute meditation at the end. And I think it was like a nimitta meditation, because he basically just said, just sit there and close your eyes until you start to see some colors, and then concentrate on the colors. And they'll come.
And this was Wim Hof that was guiding you.
Yeah.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. I
haven't listened to
I'm sorry, say that again.
I just started doing 2-minute meditations with that, which I think is such a good way in, because it just takes away your kind of fear of sitting.
Yeah. That's great. That's a great start. And I can imagine yoga, cold showers, Wim Hof. These are all things that clearly demarcate this, like wherever the nervous system was before you start and wherever the nervous system is after is quite palpable. And
definitely. And it was because I think because the experience had been so powerful and positive, it wasn't some judgmental experience. I should feel like that. It was like, oh, that's such a really nice way to feel. I would like to feel that way. So I just kept with it and kept doing it. And I would do it after exercise, which is something we touched on in the retreat. And I didn't realize till I realized after a while of doing it, if you do a really heavy hit or something like that, I was doing CrossFit at the time, and then you go and you do meditation, like the chances, your mind will just be a lot more pliable, I find, sometimes to just do, because you're really happy sitting down. So just like you're getting those endorphins. So.
Endorphin high, the monkey mind has often settled after an intense workout. You're in the body because of all the physical activity that's been at play recently. A great combo, I think, to sit after you work out.
Yeah. And then, so I kept that up for good 2 years. It wasn't strict. I just kept doing it. I was really liking to do it. It wasn't hard for me to do it. And then.
And this is, what is this, like 15 minutes every other day? Is this like an hour every day? Like
the meditation was probably only 2 minutes there. And maybe I extended it then to then I started doing an hour every day. But I think I was very tight practice. It was very tight practice when I started doing the hour, because I read. Because at the time I was state chasing a little. So I think when I started getting into meditation, I read about the jhanas pretty early on. I was like, I want to get there. And I was like, how do you get there? Laser focus. So I just tried. What's the book?
The common misperception. Yes.
Yes. It was the Ajahn Brahm. Is that his name? What's the Jhana Meditation? Yeah. I think I read that. And I was like, okay, I know how to get there. I'll do that. And I got very... that laser focus.
So let me see if I've got the sort of timeline down right. You go to a concert, you have a pretty remarkable experience, and afterwards, from a place of like curiosity and play, you're like, let me do some more of this. We've got some Wim Hof, yoga, cold plunging that might be happening. And then this is something like 15 minutes every other day for a year or two?
No, I would say 15 minutes for probably like 6 months, and then going to an hour for a year and a half. That's what I started.
Okay. Got it. Yeah. So you're doing 15 minutes pretty regularly for 6 months.
Yeah.
And then you decided to really up it, to go all the way to 100. What changed? Was it an experience? Was it something you read?
I think learning. Reading. I read the jhanas sounded like a really interesting way to get closer to. Now I would see it in a way if I was looking to get some Brahma Viharas going or something like that. I didn't read it in that lens at the time, but something I felt that there was more, because I was sitting and I was doing the 15 minutes and it was interesting and nice. But I wanted to see how far that could go.
Yeah, and this is, you do Wim Hof and then you sit for 15 minutes afterwards.
Yeah, so exercise, Wim Hof, sit, yoga.
That's a nice combo. Okay, so this is a whole routine: exercise, Wim Hof, sit, yoga, and you're doing this.
I know cold shower also before the yoga.
And so this is going to take you what, an hour, 2 hours to do?
It took 2.5 hours. I was getting up at 6:20 every morning or something like that. Yeah.
Okay, wow. So for this 6 months, it's not just that you have, oh yeah, 15 minutes of meditation is nice. It's you've got a full-on 2 hour habit that you're doing every morning starting
Yeah.
at 20.
And it happened just like that as well, because the concert's experience was so like moving
Yeah.
and powerful. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was really nice.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. So you had a moving concert experience that just immediately translated into 2 hour a day
Yeah.
morning practice.
Yeah,
That
I was watching a
is,
video about integration the other day. Was that guy Adeptus Psychonautica? He's quite a good no nonsense YouTuber, and he was saying that when he was talking about integration, he was trying to say everyone's trying to sell it in some way or something, but he was like, really, it's just translating an action into your life. And I was like, oh yeah, it can just happen sometimes. And I didn't consciously do that; it just did
yeah.
happen. But
Yeah.
I'm definitely not a person who is getting up, going to the gym every morning like consistently or doing things like that before that experience. Yeah.
Yeah. It is fascinating. Prior to having an experience, you really have a bootstrap problem because you have less clarity as to what kind of experience you might create for yourself and how to do it, and less motivation to do so. But if you have an experience, then something like habifying, like the recreation of that experience, is like not sometimes isn't even a question. It's like, what do you mean? Of course I
Yeah.
want to do this. This is incredible. I would absolutely love it. It's effortless.
Yeah, and I think there's something too for me which speaks to like why there's certain substances I like is that it didn't feel artificial. I didn't feel like I had been like hopped up, and that's why I felt so good. I felt that I had
Yeah.
tuned into something extant and real that I just been given access to through these substances, and I didn't really didn't make sense to me that you would only be able to access things like that through ingesting something. It's obviously in you. That made sense to me a lot.
Yeah, it is. It is fascinating that some people report like on a substance that there's just this sense of, no, that was even more real than my typical experience in a sense.
Mm.
That was very accessible. I just have this intuition. And perhaps on other substances or in certain sets and settings, that's less. Okay, so I'm getting a clear picture. You have this pretty remarkable experience that was both music and substance induced that catapults into a 2 hour a day routine that involves yoga, breath work, exercise. Wow, you did it all. This is, in my mind, this is like the road to advanced meditation and the road to increased baseline happiness.
Yes, there are bumps though.
Oh, I'm sure there are. I know. I want to hear those. But just so then I have it right, you start reading about this stuff too. Is that what's happening in this 6 month period? Okay.
Yes, yeah.
In one
I'm
of the
very
first,
like audiobooks and books. I love nonfiction. I just love learning. I've always been really curious. I love reading very
yeah,
deeply into things. Yeah.
yeah. And what are the things that you're picking up in this period? You mentioned John Brahm. Were there
Yeah.
other people and other resources that were starting to influence your thinking about this? You have this 2 hour habit, but only 15 minutes is meditation.
I'm trying to think how much I read. I think I found more teaching and more Dharma talks after. I think that I still had my materialist hang up. And I even found people like Wim Hof, like I had to drop, and this I think is one of the things that helped me from that concert experience. I had to drop that feeling that I used to do, which is when anybody said one thing that I thought was just a bit woo, that I would just discount a lot of the things they said. And I had a really
Yeah,
bad habit of doing that.
yeah.
And it was, yeah, that was a real thing I definitely had. And it was quite disrespectful in some ways or just like dismissive. I see. I'm not judging myself for it. I'm just saying that I was aware
That's
of
what you're
that. So I think
doing.
in that
Yeah.
time, I did still do that. So let's say I would have read about meditation, but it would always been with the cause. I'd be like, I want to be able to focus more. I want to be able to write more music. It was a bit capitalistic, like the way I was trying to
Yeah.
at it. Yeah. Yeah.
I see. I see. So like initial relationship with meditation was is effectively like, oh, this will be a way of productivity gains.
Yeah,
Yeah.
a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the happiness side too, and then the productivity gains too.
Yep.
I think
Okay.
that's
So two part. It's I
yeah,
get more happiness. I get productivity. Yep.
yeah.
Great. And
I
which
think probably the happiness I thought would come more from the cold showers and the Wim Hof and the exercise, and that the meditation would help me focus. And yeah,
fascinating. Yep. Makes sense. And yeah, those are good reasons to engage in
yeah,
these kind of. But this is a really interesting observation, I think, and one that I certainly resonates with me, and one that I think I've heard from people that there's this like if you're listening to somebody who says something a little woo, that is a red flag. You're like, wow, this person isn't explaining things in either the simplest ways or the most likely or like plausible ways. And by association, what else do I need to be a little skeptical of? But at some point, you decided that like um, dismissiveness, to use your term, was not that helpful. And how did that come about? How did you decide that there might be a different way to engage with the content from somebody who occasionally says things that sound pretty woo?
I think the things like the Wim Hof, like you could feel what that did to your nervous system. So I'm like, yeah, okay, he says loads of crazy things, but sometimes. But once people start going about the pineal and all those sort of things, kind of pseudoscience-y stuff, just using sometimes that would have torn me away. But then I was like, but yeah, but I know how I feel after that. I feel good. So
Yeah,
okay, so maybe not everything that these people are saying is true, but like perhaps the practices have something. And then also I would see things like I looked into the history of where he got his stuff from the Tumo meditation. I saw these like monks like meditating and drawing sheets off their back and stuff like that. And I was like, okay, so maybe they're onto something too. I'll look at that later on, but didn't get back into it.
okay, so there's like a whole world of woo out there. And
Mm,
some people are talking about pineal gland, quantum stuff, and other people are like, no, just do a lot of this breathing. And you're like, wow,
yeah.
okay. When I did a lot of the breathing, felt pretty remarkable. So
Yes.
I wasn't expecting that. Let me then look at the adjacent woo area, and we've got the
Yeah.
tumo breathing, and then maybe even the pineal gland folks. Like maybe there's something there. They're just explaining it in weird ways, or something that I'm
Yeah.
not buy into. So I'm going to proceed with a bit more open-mindedness.
Exactly. Yeah. And that was it.
Got
And
it.
I just decided to look that way because I realized that it's probably a bit more immature or just like, also, you don't have to give up your whole rationality when you listen to the people. You could give them their time and take their opinion. If you don't like what some of they say, then throw that bit away and keep the bit you like.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. You're not doing yourself an injustice by listening to somebody and entertaining.
No.
In fact, that's what real rationality is
Yeah.
I trust I will be able to return to the most rational conclusion if I suspend belief for a minute and rebuild from first principles or from what I'm hearing. I think that's great. And tell us a little bit more about tumo breathing and what you learned when you looked into that after your Wim Hof experience.
I just saw that was what he had adapted, and I still I guess that was on that thing of being the physical side. So when I was seeing that, it wasn't because obviously they are. I think they're doing fire casino and then they're doing the breathing at the same time. I think that's the practice. If I'm wrong, I could be wrong on that. But
I'm
I
not
just saw
familiar. Yeah.
I saw
Yeah.
a pretty stunning video where they were sitting out in like in Tibet and they were putting wet sheets on them and drying them off the guys doing the Tumo fire meditation. Yeah.
What do you mean drawing them off? And like, was
Sorry,
this in a cold
drying.
place?
So they would put the
Oh,
wet sheet
drying.
on them in the cold. So they'd be out in the cold and they would just put the wet sheets on them. And then the sheets would be dried by these guys like doing the thing. I've seen a video of it. It was like crazy.
Wow. Wow.
The stuff that you see in Tibetan Buddhism sometimes when you eventually your mind is open, you're like, why is the world ignoring this stuff? This stuff is crazy.
Maybe I might put this into the list of links I want to follow up on tumo breathing drying sheets. You think this will get me the Google thing?
I'd say it will, yeah, yeah.
We'll put maybe if we can find the video, we'll put it into the notes or something
Great.
afterwards. But okay, so thank you for indulging me as I dive into some of these details. But I think I'm now getting a clear picture of how you're now starting to consume more resources. Hey, let me proceed with like healthy skepticism as opposed to dismissive skepticism. And I get to the 6 months mark or so. And at this point, rattle off for me again some of the resources that you've drawn inspiration from.
I think the main one was the Ajahn Brahm, and then just because I was more still a little not wanting to, I wanted to stay on my own path more. I think I was like looking for the technique in the quickest way I could find out what it was, and then just trying to do it rather than reading a whole book where people talked about stuff that I didn't at the time want to hear about.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
So this is, I think that this is an interesting point too, because there are different ways in which people engage with this material, and you're like on the spectrum from like what you might call like scribing to conjuring or scribing to like experimenting. It sounds like you're clearly on the experimenting side. You're not like reading and reading and drowning yourself in books. You're like, give me a tiny little piece of information and I'm going to go play with it.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, that's what I would have been doing at the time. So I think that's why I wouldn't have that many people names I can think of them, because I would have just looked up again and be like, okay,
Sure.
that one was interesting. What else can I do? What should I be concentrating on? What do I need to focus on?
Yeah. And then something changes and you decide to go for a full hour of meditation a day.
Yes. I think
What
that
changed?
sometimes I would come back and do the shorter meditation and I could see that my mind just would go off and I could separate it from it a bit, just see it thinking, and I was separate and I was like, okay, let's go further. I want to see. And I wanted to just get more out of the states. I wanted to see where they lead to.
So this too was also like, this was organic, but perhaps it wasn't as like sudden as your concert experience, and that you just wanted your meditations to get longer, more gradually as you. Yeah.
I think part of it too would have been that I noticed in my job every day when you're writing songs, every day, no matter how many times you've had success, you're like going in and you're like, oh, I want to make a hit. I want to make a song, and you get this
Yeah.
battle with your ego. And I think sometimes you like have fear when you're creating, and I wanted to learn to look at the fear differently. I wanted to learn, actually at the time, I think I was trying to get rid of the fear, which we'll get into later on. But
Yeah.
yeah, as in, so I think that was part of it too. I was like, if I meditate more, then maybe I will be able to be more, I think at the time, in control of my thoughts is how I was thinking. I'll be able to control my
Mm-hmm.
creativity. I'll be able to control my state of mind. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that the desire for control around some of these things is that resonates with me too. As like at some point in time, that was important to me.
Yeah.
And say a little bit more about this fear motivation. So you mentioned this idea that you would sit down and you would really want to build a hit, and there's some sort of fear in the system.
I think that sometimes it just, there can be fear that stops you from communicating authentically with a new person you've met who you're trying to tell whether you do something or don't. There can be fear about, I feel like you're just wasting sometimes brain cycles being afraid of, can I make a song today? Can I make a hit? When really you should just like open to source in some sort of manner. And I just wanted to not use those cycles to do that. I was still being very like engineering about it. You know what I mean? Thinking
Yeah.
this is what because I'm trying to find a routine that would make me make sure to get a good song that day or something creative or good. Yeah, that sort of thing.
Yeah. I've heard various takes on the framework of, are you living from a place of like joy and play, or from a place of like fear and anxiety or something? And I think I remember a podcast I really enjoyed with Jim Detmer from the Conscious Leadership Institute, who I think is a like pretty prominent executive coach, and talks a lot about being above or below the line in reference to operating from this kind of place. And it also resonates with me that when you really step into your most like peak performance moments, uh, almost never is it from fear. It's almost like from a place of flow, play,
Mm.
those kinds of states. But interesting to me, that was part of your journey here. Like the cobbling together how some of these decisions that you made along the way and what they were motivated by at a given point in time starts to, I think, build a richer picture of how you got to where you got. Okay, so 6 months into meditation or so, you're now starting to ramp up. And you're starting to notice things in the real world, like this sort of relationship with fear when you're producing music. And how do things evolve from there?
And so then I do a good solid year of the practicing an hour a day, and I feel like I establish good concentration. Now looking back with more knowledge of what was going on, I can see that I was actually probably getting to states like first jhana, but because I was trying to concentrate so hard, and then as soon as I would see the state, I would go for it, and I'd be like, oh, and I just grasp and then use it. And I remember, I think my
Yeah.
first experience of PT would just be like jolts of the head, and as soon as the head jolted, I was like, that was going somewhere, but I couldn't get to the place where it went because I would just keep trying to grasp because I was trying to
Yeah.
concentrate.
Yeah. And that
Yeah.
word you used, PT, just so for
Sorry. Yeah.
as context, yeah. Actually, say what your understanding of PT is in your own words.
For me, it's like lots of people describe it as like rapture or like joy, like bubbly joy. I almost see it as just like, I don't know, like fizzy bubbles in your body, or just like your body starting to move.
Yeah.
For me, the body plan feeling that even if you're sitting down, your body suddenly feel like it's on the side or flattened or something like that. Just you can sense that a altered consciousness is starting. Yeah, that I'd say would be. Then so the word in the canon for it is PT, and it's a useful word because it covers all those experiences. Yeah.
Yeah. So a full year of an hour a day, and as you say, you learn how to concentrate, and then where to from there?
So then I was like, I'm going to do a psychedelic journey, and I'm going to set my intention to be, I think I set the intention to be like create without fear. Now, that's a bad idea
Huh?
because in the trip started getting a bit freaky or whatever. And then I was like, oh, this is a scary trip. And then I realized like, oh, I can't control my mind. I can't control my thoughts. And I'm like, okay, what I can do is I can do my mantra, and I'll do my mantra. And then when I look again, I won't be thinking that thought that I was just thinking. And then do my mantra, and I'm like, am I thinking the thought? And then as soon as obviously I look, I'm thinking the thought. I just totally freak myself out, spin out so bad, like really like very like anxious. And yeah, I'm quite baseline happy and chill most of the
Yeah.
time. I
Yeah.
think I don't not particularly for most of my life, not particularly anxious person or anything like that. So suddenly be cast into a world of anxiety and like fits of panic attacks and stuff like that. pretty intense. So that was like, oh shit, I don't really know what to do here.
So you used the word panic attacks, plural. Like you started having panic attacks after
Yeah,
this
yeah,
trip?
yeah. I did, because the first one was in the Jhourney, and I'd never experienced one in my life before, and so that was very strange. And that's a bad time to have a first panic attack
Yeah.
on your own. Yeah,
Yeah.
so silly, but it's part of the journey. That's what happens sometimes. I think always I knew that I would find a way through. I think even the next day after it happened, I was like, I think I'm trying to be taught something here, but I just don't know what it is yet. And so, yeah, I would have like panic attacks. And then also, I got like a real aversion to altered states in the body, because like bodily activation got associated for me with the feeling of going to lose control, or like thoughts that in that
Yeah.
sort of way. So then when I would try to meditate for a while, then, and feelings of PT and those sorts of altered states would come up, I'd be like, and it would freak me out. So I stopped meditating for a good, how long? Probably a year. Yeah.
Oh,
Maybe
wow. Yeah.
6 months, I would say 6 months. Yeah. I didn't meditate regularly, and my whole kind of routine, it was around COVID time too. So my kind of routine crumbled.
Crumbled. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And what was the frequency of these panic attacks at this chapter?
I would say every few weeks. Yeah. Every few
Wow.
weeks.
Okay. So every few weeks you'd
And
have
if
a
I
panic
had
attack.
cannabis, you could pretty reliably bring one on as well. Yeah.
Oh, lovely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, just what we're looking for. A way to bring on panic attacks. And so, and tell me about, give me a sense for the texture. How would this panic attack start? What would happen physiologically? What was your attention on, and the shape of your attention during the panic attack?
So like really elevated heart rate, like clammy, and then maybe sometimes accompanied with a sense of like total like gravity falling, like falling really low into the ground. Yeah,
Huh. Like you're
yeah,
sinking.
yeah, but not sinking didn't do the justice to the speed. Just like drop, like
Oh, you're
someone
like plummeting.
yeah, yeah, but yeah, just like that sort of thing,
Wow.
and just
Wow.
like the heart rate would go up, like just adrenaline. You could, I guess, it's adrenaline, right? So I suppose just
Yeah.
fight or flight, bang, like that.
Yeah. And this would happen to you spontaneously, or this would happen because
Yeah, maybe
something
sometimes it'd be
happened?
like maybe like sometimes a movie or a certain thought or those sorts, yeah, like stuff like that. That would mainly be I'm trying to think.
And could you see it coming?
I'd say I could make it come by accident. If you see it coming, you'd be like, oh, if I start thinking about this, then now I think that it was very mental based. It was based on like
Yeah.
thoughts I found. Yeah. So
Yeah.
I'd be like, oh, if I go down that road, now like I don't want to go down that road, and then I would go down that.
Oh man, this sounds rough.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
It was like, it was strange. And then, so that went on for a few months. And also, I think a contributory factor to all of this was my best friend in 2019. He suddenly got very mentally ill, and it was like just out of nowhere, and psychoses, and just
Wow.
totally changed his life. It seemed like it was obviously out of nowhere to us. There was things in his life that led to it and stuff like that. But it was just so, that was so, one day I was talking to him, and then 2 weeks later, his like parents are like bringing him to meet me to bring me to the airport. And it was just so crazy. And I think
Wow.
that plus another tragedy in the family had maybe subconsciously instilled like a fear of the mind and madness and
Yeah.
things like that. Yeah. So I think that's what was manifesting through these sorts of the panic and things like that. Yeah. Just
Yeah.
like a connection to that. But so after about a while of that, I was always like, I think also there is some level of ontological shock going on in slow motion from that really great period of things being good, but being so materialist. So then I think my way of out of things is to help myself. And after I've made more, effort to reach out and to talk to people about things and to be more like vulnerable. But at the time, I'm like, okay, I'm going to read, I'm going to find things out. Then I started to follow Mingyur Rinpoche, and I don't know how. I must have been looking up panic and meditations and things like that. And
Yeah.
Mingyur Rinpoche, Tibetan, it just has a lovely vibe, very calming. And all of his meditations would be about allowing and everything. Every time he's talking, he'd just be like, he'll tell you about meditation. He'd be like, it's okay. He'd be like, whatever you think of, that's okay. And he's like, when you're not aware, and then you realize you're aware, then you're aware. There's no problem. And he just like these sorts of like very, that wasn't my approach before. And I just started to do that. And the one that really got me and like really helped me the most, I think, with the panicky stuff was this one where on the out breath, you were with the breath, and on the in breath, you could think about whatever the hell you liked, and you were not doing anything. And the combo of the two of those, and because it was changing, just totally took away that part that goes, oh, you should be doing nothing, and then the part that goes, you should be on the breath, and it would just calm, and it was very powerful. And then little by little, then from the way he talked, it gave me this new kind of foundation, because he talked about things like basic goodness and stuff like that. And to me, they stood up to a rational examination of what they are. Even like the people who've done the worst things in the world were trying to be happy or to please themselves, even if they do it really wrongly and in a terrible manner, those sorts of things. And like that really resonated with me, because I'd seen things like because of my friend and stuff like that, the bad things that had happened to me and some other people. And that those sort of things then started to give more of the heart to the teaching. And that's when I started to get back into meditation heavily again after that.
Yeah. Oh, that's interesting. The two thoughts that I had in response to that. The first is there's this great quote, I think, by Marshall Rosenberg, that should is the most violent word in the English language. And how happy of an event for you that you found a teacher or a way of doing it that allowed you to escape the should trap that is so frequently part of the dissonance and the violence and the negative trips and the anxiety loops that we can find ourselves in.
Yeah.
Do you think that Mingyur Rinpoche would have resonated in the same way with you 2 years prior to psychedelics?
That's a good question. I'm not certain that it would have, and I don't know if any of the things could have happened at other times.
Yeah.
For me, I don't know if I would have. I definitely felt as well, because I then, when I would tell friends about this kind of thing, and so I just found out that friends of mine, that some of them have had panic attacks since they're like 6 years old. I'm like, what? I'm like, really? You've lived with that your whole life, that kind of thing? And so that suffering opened up a lot of opened me up a lot, like that kind of the cracks are where the light gets in and that sort of thing. So I do think that was part of the thing for me. And that's all, even the Buddha's, the mythical stories with the Buddha where he's in the garden and everything's all good, and then he starts to see the suffering of the world, and that changes him. And so that really, all of those things resonated with me a lot, and that's the stuff I hadn't really looked at before that.
Yeah.
I was always trying to find secular Buddhism before that. I just remember the other one I read was Why Buddhism is True.
I'm blanking his name right now.
Is it Batchelor? I think it might be Stephen Batchelor or something like that. I can't remember. I don't want to say the wrong name.
Robert Wright. Is that right?
Robert Wright. Thank you.
Yeah.
Probably.
Yeah. Another book that comes up frequently. That's great.
Yeah, and so but that one as well would have been trying to, like, he's just talking about the neuroscience of it all and just trying to avoid, and then eventually, no, I need some warmth from this. Give me more stories. That's what I wanted. Because Mingyur would do these the website's quite good, Turgar International, and he'd just have a view, little really, really short Dharma talk, like 4 minutes. And then there'd be meditations that were either 15, 20, 10 or 25 minutes, and you could do whichever one you wanted with after the little lesson that he'd given.
Cool.
And sorry, go ahead.
Just that your comments on Why Buddhism is True is that's a more neuroscience oriented book without the kind of warmth that Mingyur Rinpoche provides to some of his stories and techniques.
Or that's how I saw it at the time. So I don't want to knock it in case it does have warmth, okay? Because maybe it does. But I read it in a way of just, and maybe I totally discounted all that stuff because I was just like, yeah, whatever. It's a brain.
Yep. Great. This is all making, I can see it unfolding clearly. And you definitely had some knocks. And so then you start getting back into meditation after 6+ month hiatus, and you're still having panic attacks. What happens then?
Yeah. I just start to be able to watch them because of that technique, the mixed open awareness and awareness of the breath. And I start to be able to watch them. And then when you can start to watch them, then Mingyur told this great story about that he would get panic attacks when he was like a kid, when they first got sent to the monastery and they were blowing the huge horns, and it would just give him panic, and he was trying to get away from it, and one of his big things was like, oh, just learn to be with the panic, watch it. And the more you would watch it, then less of a
and how is watching it different from what you were doing earlier?
Trying to escape it. Yeah, they're just trying to escape it, and when you try to escape it, you just make it stronger.
Okay, so if you just watch it, would the panic attack happen as it normally happens, or would it happen differently?
Yeah, it might, but it becomes just this kind of like physical phenomenon that you can watch eventually. If you stop believing the kind of spinning out of the mind, or stop believing it, because you can't stop believing something on purpose, but I'm going to watch it. And then you watch your body and you watch your heart, and your heart goes up, you get a bit clammy, and then eventually the feedback loop starts to lessen, just lessen.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. And so you then learned to just watch panic attacks happen in real time.
Yes, yeah, and you'd watch, and then you learn to watch them enough, then they don't really they don't happen anymore. They didn't happen anymore. That's for me. They didn't happen
Yeah.
anymore.
Yeah. Fascinating. And how long did this take?
I don't think that long after I discovered that particular technique. I would say like a few months, and then they weren't really happening anymore.
And you were
I
practicing
could still bring them on if I had some cannabis.
Yeah,
But that became useful then, because you could reliably bring one on to watch it.
Whoa. Okay. Okay. Interesting. So I want to back up just a second. So you started meditating again. How long, how much time per day were you spending on this Mingyur Rinpoche?
I think a lot of it was informal practice, and that's I would do his meditation, but then because I had to deal with the panic and stuff, watching my everyday awareness just became a thing that I had to do. To feel. So yeah, informal practice a lot. So I would probably be meditating eventually, because he talks about that all the time. He's very about that. He's like all the time, every time you can remember, be a rest in awareness, rest in awareness.
Yeah.
And I just started doing it like all the time. And I know that sounds effortful, but it wasn't effortful. Yeah.
I get it. Yeah. And there's this interesting thing about dosage that we often talk about, this like formal time, like that you set aside to close your eyes and sit on a cushion somewhere or something. And at some point, the experience becomes a lot about what you're doing everywhere else in the day. And that informal practice can dwarf the amount of time that you're spending in formal practice. But just so I have a sense, what kind of formal hours were you putting in at this point?
20 minutes a day, something like that.
Got it. So
and
20
probably
minutes
not
a
even
day.
religiously.
Yeah, 20 minutes a day. And then this thing is like pretty top of mind for you. And you're starting to watch your experience sort of day in and day out. Got it. And then a few months goes by and you have more or less cured yourself of panic attacks because you learned to watch them.
Yeah.
And at what point do you start intentionally inducing them so that you can learn to watch them?
Because I would be like, I don't want to live in fear, and and sometimes if I want to go to a concert, or I don't know, be in LA and I'm working in a studio and I want to have cannabis at that particular time, I didn't want to live a life where I couldn't do that. So I'd be like, I'm just going to try it anyways and see what happens.
Yeah.
And I would just do that a bit. And every time you would eventually learn that, oh, look, yeah, my heart rate goes up, freak out a bit, but I'll just watch it. And then away it goes. Yeah.
So fascinating. And how many times do you think you induced this intentionally?
Oh, a lot.
A lot. 10 times, like 100 times?
Up to 50, I would say, something like that.
Yeah. And would you like use some cannabis and then do multiple of them? Or is this like each one is...
No, there'd be one, and then it would just, I wouldn't try to bring it on, let's say, but it would just maybe just happen because, as everybody knows, cannabis can bring up anxiety. So it would just sometimes happen. Not everybody, sorry. For lots of people, it gets rid of it. But not for me.
Not for you. Okay. Wow. Really interesting. And I think it's fun getting snippets of some of the micro level decisions you made, because I think it tees up a particular kind of mentality or approach you were taking to this puzzle. Like the idea of inducing panic attacks so that you can learn to watch them strikes me as not something perhaps everybody does when they grapple with their own panic attack journey. And then where to from here? So you're meditating again, you've got panic attacks to a point where you've radically changed your relationship with them. What follows?
I think then I start to discover people like Rob Burbea and his teachings. Had so much heart. And I just start like him, Ram Dass, all those people, Rob Burbea like the most, because it just, I don't know, just the heart that I didn't look for before. Also, he speaks and talks in that kind of nice sensibility where he's not one that you have to worry about with, and he doesn't ever say anything really self-aggrandizing or anything like that.
Yeah.
And it's such a understated tone where there's even more depth behind what he's saying. So when he says something, you're like, he's doing the same thing as John Hopkins did, the musician, where he knows something, that guy,
he knows something, that guy.
Because he's not telling me that he knows something, then I'm like, I want to learn more about that thing. So I left the jhanas behind because I just wanted to, now my focus had changed from wanting to feel a certain way to just wanting to be with how I was feeling when I was feeling a certain way, and not reject certain states or chase other ones. Yeah.
Got
And
it.
yeah, then that practice just flourished, and was still a lot of informal, mainly informal, I would say.
Yeah.
Still, the practice is like not even sitting every day, but definitely I would say by the end of the day, having done good, being aware for a significant percentage of the day, been resting in awareness when
Yep.
states in the body came up, when emotions came up, things like that, just became a habit.
So formal time is still something like 20-ish minutes a day, but informal time is
I would say less than 20 minutes a day if I did the sit. And then if I just not sitting a lot, maybe sitting always before going to sleep, meditating and things like that. Yeah.
got it. Okay. And then a little bit before you go to sleep too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And how long does this go on?
Then that's what my routine had been then since then up until the Jhana retreat. Then when
Until
I
the
saw,
retreat that we did.
I was looking for, I was looking for a retreat to go to, but there's not that many Jhana retreats. And also I'm glad I didn't go as well to a Aversion retreat. Not that I'm sure it works for some people, but I wouldn't be the right thing for my psychology. But I might have ended up going to one if there was one, just to go, because I
Yeah.
didn't know.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's been the practice basically since then. Yeah, it's been that up to the retreat. Then going up to the retreat, I knew I'd be able to sit because I had done the long time of doing my hour sits. So I wasn't afraid of not being able to sit. And then just after you guys announced the retreat, I signed up for it and I was like, okay, I'll start sitting now. So I started sitting an hour a day on the way up to the retreat.
Which was the three weeks in advance or something.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, I probably started
Yeah.
doing it 2 weeks before. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So just a couple of weeks. And then so you show up at the retreat and your thought process is, I would like to learn the jhanas, or you have some other goal in mind. Yeah.
I realized that I had done every now and then I would do a slightly like a determined sit for me, which would be like I did a 2 hour sit one day in Ireland, and I got things that I thought were pretty close to the jhanas. And afterwards felt very like I went for a walk and everything was like lovely and colorful and nice. So I was like, okay, this is good.
Okay.
So I expected hopefully to feel like that sort of thing. And I went in with the mind that I had been close to the jhanas, but always grasped at them. I still had that grasping. I know we still have grasping all the time, but I'm talking about when the body would start to change, to get an altered state, I'd be like grabbing and then thinking about the fact that I was trying to get in there. So that kind of thing.
And how long had you gone since your last panic attack?
Oh,
like a year or like a few months?
Yeah, over a year, I think. I don't know what the timeline is.
Okay.
Probably a year and a bit. Yeah.
Got it. So it had been a while since you had been in this, like, meditation is like happy and wholesome and largely informal, and first informed by Mingyur Rinpoche and then informed by Burbea, both of whom are kind of one of a kind folks. And then you'd had some maybe like positive peak experiences, like that 2 hour sit in Ireland. You're like, maybe I can figure out how to create more of these peak experiences.
Yes. And I think that the meditation had helped me a lot, to the point that that friend of mine who was mentally ill, because of COVID and stuff, like we didn't see each other as much. And then also when I was struggling a bit, I found it really hard to see him sometimes. And then unfortunately, eventually he took his own life.
Wow.
Like a year ago, basically, just a year and a month ago. And I had just seen him again because I felt like I was feeling very resourced. And I was like, I want to help him again and get him back in my life more.
Yeah.
I'd seen him and he seemed so good. And then just a few weeks later, then he'd taken his own life. And
David.
Yeah, it was very rough. And he, at the same time as that, actually, I'd went to the week before he unfortunately died by suicide. The week before that, I had gone to a retreat not a meditation retreat, but like a psilocybin retreat in the Netherlands. And I had reckoned with a lot of allowing and stuff like that. And that was my first like trip since the time I had the difficult one. So I like reckoned with that. I had reckoned with that, and I was feeling resourced and like looking forward to getting my friend back in my life more and all that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So after that, I was very glad as well to have had the resources to deal with that kind of the sadness and the pain and things like that. And meditation was such a good help with that, because I think before I would have been so scared of the sadness and tried to change it. Do you know what I mean? As opposed to with the newer practice I was doing, which would be like resting in it.
You had learned from panic attacks, from a full-on physiological effect, that there's a different way of engaging with sadness.
Yeah. And so then the sadness even then could sometimes be, I could see it also through some of the Buddhist kind of like philosophical lenses of basic goodness, and also just realizing Mingyur Rinpoche is very much about the troubles being the source of transformation, the obstacles. So I could see that the reason I was so sad for my friend is because he was such a loving person, such a beautiful person. So the sadness is there, but it's horrible, but there's beauty too, because it's fundamentally that's not, some people will be like, what the hell? That it's not like you're enjoying being sad, but that helps to be able to just see it from a slightly different way of looking. They're still really sad, but there's a beauty to it too.
There's a beauty to it.
Yeah.
I'm reminded of the end of Inside Out when Sarah, you know that movie?
Yes.
Yeah. When sorrow and joy learn to make memories together. And that's a beautiful way of describing it, that there's like a beauty in the sadness, and that's a different way of engaging. Wow. Holy cow. So meditation has first been a part of and opening up to some big knocks, and then helping you navigate some big knocks. And then you came on our retreat after a year of, sounds like, recovery from a few things.
Yeah. And strangely, the retreat ended. The reason I had to leave the retreat just on the last day was because his anniversary mass was the next day, or not the mass, the anniversary meeting.
Wow. Yeah.
So it was like that felt kismet, or whatever the hell the word they say, which was,
what was the word that you used?
Is that kismet or something like that? That kind of serendipitous.
Serendipitous.
Yeah.
Great. I want to dig in to bring the timeline of your journey to a close, to your jhana experiences, what those were like, and then it's been a few weeks since retreat, and so I'm curious to know what those have meant for you since.
Yeah. So I went in thinking I want to get to the jhanas, but knowing that I had to drop the urge, but you can't drop the urge on purpose.
Such a paradox between clear intent and surrender as like the way of arriving at intent. Yeah.
And I felt good in my sits on the way up to it. I felt like samadhi, which is that feeling of the body starting to become concentrated or harmonized, was dropping in fairly easily for me when I was sitting. I was mainly doing awareness of the breath on the way into the retreat. That was my object. And then in the retreat, I saw that you mentioned you were doing things in the style of Burbea and stuff. So I listened to his jhana retreats. I've listened to those loads of times because I just like listening to them. I didn't at the time when I was just doing awareness of the breath, not the metta. And I just didn't listen that much. I've done a bit of metta and I like it, but I hadn't tried it that much, that purpose. And so I went at the retreat, you guys were like, that's going to be the main approach there, is be the metta meditation. I was like, okay, we're at the retreat, so let's throw ourselves into that. So threw myself into that, and then I think as I was doing, I realized eventually that I had still maybe doing a lot of the concentration style, like absorption jhanas, which is like even though I wasn't trying to do that, but I was trying to focus quite hard on metta in the process. But I was going to like first and second jhana. I was pretty sure there was a good deepening exercise as well on the first night with Doug, the excellent teacher at the retreat.
Yeah, that's Doug Kraft. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Author of Buddha's Map and a handful of other books in the twin community. That's right.
And he did a deepening exercise on the first night, and that definitely took me to areas in around the first, second, and third.
The first, second, and third, this was like your first time in these states, or you remember these?
I think I've been in the first and second before. Yeah, okay. For sure.
And like once or twice, or like a dozen times, or hundreds, or?
No, I'd say up to a dozen, and maybe not knowing what they were, and also maybe not that deep. So yes, a lot of the factors of those states were there, but maybe also a lot of perhaps discursive thought, or leaving into thought a lot. I see.
And you had entered into states that resembled these previously during longer sits, or on psychedelics, or?
Yeah, a bit of both. A bit of both, yeah.
Okay.
And I think looking back now, probably a bit in childhood too, maybe before you go to sleep, that sort of thing. Some things, maybe not 1 and 2, but maybe things closer to the later-y sort of body changing ones where the form starts to change a bit.
Yeah. Lee Brazenton tells me that about 10%, or I think he might have even written in his book that like 10% of his students frequently report after they learn the jhanas, memories of having entered them in childhood in various forms, some via games they're playing with themselves. So it can be a frequent thing, or some. So it's interesting. And okay, so there's a deepening exercise that takes you into the first few states. You're using metta for the first time and finding it useful, not that useful.
Yeah, finding it useful. And I had definitely done a bit of metta meditation before, but not like long sits. And I think that if I didn't manage to get it going at the start, I would just change back to breath a lot of the time. I was like, it's not a metta day today. I'll just do something else. But there I was trying to like consistently do the metta meditation, and it was good. And I was just trying messing with different techniques of it. Definitely taking everything that Doug would say and you guys would say, but then sometimes just mixing it up myself to see what techniques worked, like whether it be a visualization or saying the word, and then getting very technical about when I did the 6 hours, which is the technique, and whether I was concentrating on the feeling more, or the saying of the thing. I think I did a bit of mixing up. Now I realize too, I would do a bit of karuna and everything too, because those things feel pretty similar to me sometimes, mixed together, more compassion and sympathy. And then back to metta, they activate a lot of the same things for me.
Wait, I think I'm realizing, not knowing about some of your backstory prior to retreat, that your experience with your friend's suicide and your own panic attacks and other challenges had no doubt made you familiar with some of the ways in which like love and grief are sort of two sides of the same coin in some ways.
Yeah, definitely. And that's why metta and karuna and metta and compassion can feel very similar to me. Like,
totally. And those, I think it's all amorphous and it's all worth a breakdown here, but there does seem to be a deep intuition at some point that these things are all related and fluid and can be, this is like a kind of a core opening quality that they all share. Yeah. Interesting. And so why don't we, to close, let's just take like your peak experience on retreat and explain to us at the more micro level what that felt like, what that was, and then the extent to which it was valuable to you and what your experience has been like since retreat.
Yeah, so then my peak experience actually happened at the end. I had lots of experience I probably would have viewed as peak experiences before that.
Amazing how a good retreat will do that. Sort of just keeps changing the definition of what peak experience is.
Yeah, exactly. And I felt I could have left on the last day and felt really good about the retreat and been like, cool, I've got a lot of tricks in my bag for practice. I think I felt that the first and second, I was like, I'm definitely going there, but they're not as intense for me as they are for other people. The third was really nice place to be, like very equanimous. But then on the last day in the morning, I said, I think it was the second sit, something like that. And I was going to go for a walk, but then I'd packed my bag up. So I was like, oh, I don't want to get my socks out. I'll just go do a 2-hour sit or something like that. But when I sat down with no expectations, and I said, I'm just going to start because I've got a lot of samadhi, concentratedness, harmonization of my mind. I feel like it's quite present. So I'll try something I don't normally do, which is like a sound meditation to like incidental sound in the room. So I just sat there, and when people were walking by or the wind was blowing, I was just letting all those sounds come to me and very gently just setting the intention to my awareness to go back to it, not trying to concentrate on it, just saying to my mind, would you mind? So coming back to that as often as you could, please and thank you. And then you can think about whatever you like, mind and body, you can feel however you like, but just if you wouldn't mind going back to that as often as you can. And so I did, and I just found samadhi dropped in really quick. And then I noticed that one of the things that you guys had said as teachers was like, just try to get as little tension as possible, create as little tension as possible in the system. And I had been doing that definitely in the sits up to then. But then I realized after about half an hour of doing that meditation that there was like, my face was like, I had my smile going just because I was smiling because I was happy. But there was no tension in my like face here and not really any in my body, a lot less than there had been. I was like, that's no tension. That's interesting. So I kept that sound meditation.
How many times during the retreat do you think you updated on what no tension was?
A lot, yeah.
So,
but that was like a paradigm change. That one
a paradigm change.
Okay. Yeah, definitely.
So you had been updating, it sounds like a lot, throughout the retreat, and yet there was still a paradigm change on what no tension was on effectively the last day. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, because I just think that we don't realize the state of tension we walk around in. You do if you end up with a lot of trauma in your body. Like I have a friend of mine who was beaten up once, and because of that, his shoulders are still always like, he finds he gets really bad, like they just get higher and higher. So they were really aware of tension then, but you're not aware of subtle tension. Even when you're sitting, I've been sitting like 7 hours a day for how many days, and there was still tensions I could feel, but I didn't know where they were. And it was only when they started to go, I was like, oh, my face is so calm.
It's so calm and light. Yeah.
And it was like, that was very interesting. And I was like, and then because it was calm, I was like, okay, now I can go do some metta. And then when I started the metta, I was like, oh, look, you're getting a bit of tension there. So I was okay, just say you're going to do metta. Don't try. And then the meta just started, and it just felt like I was radiating the meta instead of, it wasn't a choice. I was like, oh, look, you're just paying attention to that now, and it's happening, and you don't have to do anything. And anytime I felt like I was doing anything, I was like, okay, just stop doing something. And it just got deeper and deeper. And even then, there was like a bit of grabbing then, because I still really wanted to go deeper. So my body would every now and then be like, oh.
Yep.
Then even then, I was like, the only response to that was to not grab at that. So I'd just be like, okay, yeah. Just be like, any tension, relax that tension. Keep doing that. And eventually I ended up in just this absolutely beautiful place of just most calm I've ever felt, including any experience I've ever had on anything. Just so calm, but clear, so clear too. It's like, if you say calm like that, people, I think they assume you're sleepy or something like that, but it's like so far from that. And I just remember, I remember something Doug had said, that your mind wants to do what you ask it, but it's just, it can't do it. If it did it all the time, then we wouldn't be alive, because we need to have a mind that gets us out of trouble and stuff. So I thought that at the time, as I was in this very deep state. And then I was like, oh yeah, so you do. And then my kind of, because of that aversive kind of relationship I'd had with my mind a bit from the panic attacks and stuff, I still had, still a bit of a build up around those sorts of things, even if you're not getting the panic attacks anymore. Then said that part of that cognitive dissonance started to play out in front of me in my mind, and in that deep state where then some part of me then said, oh, that's okay. I'm sorry that I'd give you a hard time for getting spun out. And then the part of me that gives the heart that gets spun out was like, oh, I might do this again. And then the other part of me was like, that's okay, it's fine. And it was just so moving, beautiful, and tears, and And then eventually I came out of it, and I just sat there, and I was like, had this really low frequency oscillation that lasted for a good hour, had a little cry. It was beautiful. And it was very like, and because the inner critic felt like it had been turned off in that situation, or like just wasn't around, because the part of the inner critic that got transformed, actually, I think that's what it is. There's that idea of Sankara, the mental formations, and that there are positives to those things too. Like, they're not just negative. So I think that part of me that normally would have been like, this will happen again, got turned into, this will happen again, maybe. And that's okay. It was very compassionate. Okay. Because of that, it was like, it was really healing, and very powerful.
Wow.
Beautiful, beautiful state. Yeah.
That does sound beautiful. It sounds like, in a sense, like some low level part of you forgave another part of you for the panic attacks.
Yeah, definitely. And for like part of me forgiving the human condition a little bit, something deep, going like, you can't control what you think about, because you can't. Like, you don't get to decide what you think. So, and but also doing it in that way, with impermanence, with that lens too, and just like loads of these things coming together. And that's what the difference is. Because some people be like, I think people can be very heavy about the jhanas and be like, if there was thought, that's not the jhana. It's like, is that thought or is that insight? Because I was not lost in something. I was completely with the feeling, and this played out, and it wasn't. That's why I think that sometimes you don't want to look at all these different paths and push and take what you want, but you don't have to listen to what everybody says about what every part of a jhana is, or even try to delineate them that much. Maybe just try to drop your tension, and it'll happen.
Yeah, that's good advice. You've taken an experimentation forward approach throughout, and I think it sounds like led or not held on so tightly to some of the distinctions between these states, and you even threw out a side remark. I think they happen more intensely for other folks than me, and there's a degree to which it can be helpful to learn what's happening with other folks, because then there may be parts of the state space that you haven't explored yet, that you haven't learned to enter into. And that's in tension with the fact that, like, anybody else's map, and any map at all, is not the territory. And you found your own way to navigate through, with the hard-won wisdom of some tough.
I do feel, though, what you're saying, I agree. I think there's more to the first and second jhana to me, but I realize that the best way to find that out is just to go in. I keep remembering Doug said it one of the days, was no agenda. And that comes back to me, because even after a retreat, then some you go sit down, like, I want to feel that way again. And I realize that agenda creeps in. And there's also a big thing when you come back from retreat. At a retreat, you might have 6 meditations in the day, let's say. Maybe you might have 1. And so at the end of the day, when you go to bed, you just pick the best one, and that's the one you remember. But in a week, if you meditate once a week, you also might get one good meditation, but they were all spread out by a day. So you might be like, that week of meditation wasn't great, when really it was the same kind of percentage of good as the retreat was, but spread out in a different
Not a
manner.
bad idea. Yeah,
Yeah.
the fact that the dosage, maybe it's once every 6 hours, but if that looks like once a week or once a day based on how much
Yeah.
you're doing. Yeah. Yeah. And so sense retreat, how is this? Is this like the best thing that's happened to you in a week, the best thing that's happened in a month, in a year? And what have you been meditating since? What is your
Yeah,
relationship
be
to
one of,
meditation?
like, the probably one of the nicest, best things that's ever happened to me in one way. Like up there with like really nice events of life, like beautiful things in life, marriage and things like that. Like it's different, obviously, because connecting with others is such a wholesome, great thing. But I don't know, there's a connection with self there, and it's a beautiful thing. And also, there's a really Burbea talks about it in one of his talks about, we get insurance for our houses and we get insurance for these things, and that's a good idea. But that's something that the Dharma offers, something that these practices offer. You don't have to, if you do them enough and you learn more about them, and you don't have to believe anybody or take faith, you can see that there's something that's unborn in you, that's deeper, that's really beautiful. And to not have to take a substance or anything like that to find that gives you a real, it's not unshakable. Eventually, maybe it is, but confidence and a nice. This, that the world's a pretty messed up place sometimes, and sad things happen to people you love and stuff like that. But you're not. You are at the whim of those things, but there's an agency to be able to look inside yourself for something else, for some compassion for yourself or for others, or
Yeah.
and to see that's probably the least fabricated version of your nature by sitting down and like letting thoughts wisp away, and you see that's what's left, and you're okay, that's good. So that's a very nice
That's
thing
good.
to see, because you couldn't be pretending. It's not like you were fooling yourself, because you stopped, your thinking was so much less. So logically, when you see that, you're like, yeah, that's really.
Yeah.
And so practice then, sensory retreat has been good. I had a really nice practice today. Yeah, just trying not to be too judgy on it because it's only been a few weeks. So definitely getting into the third jhana a little, maybe the fourth today a bit, but just doing an hour a day, a longer sit today. But I'm not trying to be like, the thing I was happy about today, with the moments I felt best, was just when I was like being really aware of when tension was arising or when I was grasping and I was dropping that. I was using that moment of sartori or emptiness right after the grasp was dropped. And I was like, oh, that's even, that's just as nice as a very deep and prolonged state.
Yeah. The release that happens when we enter each jhana, or even within each jhana, is a mini, like, I've heard it referred to as a mini nibbana. It's something like they like to say a lot in the twin community.
I was really starting to see that today, for sure. Actually, that was a little just insight that was coming. I was like, oh, that's the mini moment of that, when the rest of it felt like that. Yeah.
Yeah. And the extent to which you were talking about tension at the end of the retreat, and being like, oh, this is what less tension looks like. And how that can like recursively be the case. You may have said that multiple times over the retreat, but this was a paradigm shift, and maybe there are more paradigm shifts that await.
I think there is, yeah.
It becomes
fractal tensions.
It's, I think at the start of the journey, it just seems so crazy or counterintuitive that you would prefer the tensionless, lower arousal, later jhanas to the ecstasy and like bliss and happiness and joy of the earlier jhanas. But as it turns out, with enough time and exposure, and there's a different kind of like bliss to the bliss of relief, to the release of tension. And that can be so serene and sublime. And
I think actually that's probably why, in some ways as well, because of my journey, that the first and second are not the ones calling to me that much at the moment, because of their higher states of arousal. And maybe that's my experiences in the last few years meant that those were coarser states to me already, because I was not wanting to be that way. And to go to a state like the fourth and feel calm like that was like, because that was the one that was like, this is what they're talking about. So perhaps in the future, and that's a really nice thing, your relationship with these things, everything's impermanent, it'll change, and maybe those first and second will be nicer for other things. I want to look into getting better at getting into them for making music, for things like that. Just
one of the things that is, I think, there's this model that I have in my mind that often your first experiences through the jhanas are a process of what, in more Buddhist terminology, is skillful defabrication. You are learning to pull back different layers of your mind and let go, and in doing so, really release into much less like tension, into states with much less tension. And that comes with a process of joy all the way over to peace. And then the great thing about mastery, of learning to enter into these states on command through this sort of paradoxical maneuver of surrendering, you can then engage with these states in a form of skillful fabrication. And it's like, given this place that I'm moving from emptiness and release and lack of tension, today I'll be engaging in some music making. And wouldn't it be nice if I was engaging in some music making from a loving kindness, J2, or from a deeply serene, J4, and learning to then play with these states, like, on command and with mastery, ends up being, ironically, a place of skillful fabrication, even if their initial lessons were skillful defabrication.
Exactly. And I think that's the Burbea really touches on that and gets really deep into those sorts of things in his teachings. And some of them I'm saving for the future because I want to defabricate a little more.
I like it. I love it. I love it.
But he does mention that, like, making cocktails of them, the jhanas and things like that, mixing them together a little to go on a walk, or if you're going to stargaze. And that just sounds beautiful. And again, in his really understated way, it sounds like incredible experiences. He just mentions them like they're just so like light. They're like, hey, you should check that out. And then you go check it out. You're like, whoa.
That's a great way of talking to it. Most of Burbea being like understated. Great wisdom over there. Yeah. David, this has been super fun. Thanks for taking all this time to share your experience with us. Is there, as a final question, is there anything you think you'd tell someone who's never heard of these states, or maybe a younger you, about their value to spark curiosity or perhaps ability to enter into them?
I think it's a hard question, isn't it? I think I think what I would say to them is just that, I can't remember the Pali word for it, but that, that come and see for yourself thing. Because the more I like go down this path, I realize that things you learn are so like specific to you, and the thing that might resonate with you might be the opposite of what this person wants. But I think that maybe is actually the telling thing about it. You'll probably find the thing that you need in there if you follow that path, and it's definitely worth a try. Yeah. I don't know if that's a good answer, but yeah, I think it's the best I can do.
That's great. I think there's some wisdom in there. So excellent. Till next time, David.
Excellent.